We got lucky on ArbTalk this week. It's Wednesday, about 4 p.m. Yesterday a guy called me, found me on ArbTalk, the hookup site for arborists and people who want woodchip. And we got a little drop off of this fairly leafy stuff yesterday in front of me. And then they came back today with twice as much again, really. A bit more wood in this. So we've got a big pile of woodchip here, which will be good for our paths. But I'm also going to try composting some. It's all coniferous, of course, it usually is. This is stuff that's come down in Storm Durrah, and these guys are up from Outtro doing some contract work for UK Power Networks. So some destruction of the storm is to our gain, and we'll make good use of it. I'm going to do a little bit of science as well, or at least try to. I've got some little sample pots here. One is mostly wood, and the other one is mostly leaf. And there's all sorts of information online about composting cypress, and a lot of it is don't do it and it's acidic. And I think even if it is acidic, it's not really going to matter because it will stabilize. It's something just sitting there being acidic, it's not a sort of natural state. And even if it was a problem, we could always add some lime or something like that. But we'll see what we can do. Now I'm going to stick it into a big bay, about 1 to 1.2 cubic meters, and stick an aeration tube down the middle. And I've had some good conversations with some people on the Fediverse, and I've seen some good YouTube content, which makes me pretty confident this isn't a problem. But yeah, let's do some science. Time for some kitchen science. First caveat, I am not a chemist. My highest qualification in that field is first year chemistry for civil engineers, and that was 25 years ago. My only science qualification is a degree in computer science, which is debatably a bit of a different thing. I know enough that my experiment today is not going to be very definitive, and that my methods are far from ideal. I may not even get results I feel are useful, but we shall see. What we're going to do is try and get some sort of a grasp of the pH of this material here. This is some coniferous wood chippings or shreddings that were dropped off by an arborist today. They're freshly chipped. We have separated this into some woody stuff and some leafy stuff. I'm going to do the best to measure the pH of these with the tools I have to hand. Unfortunately, my digital pH meter is way past its use by date, so we'll be using these garden test strips for this. I do also have some buffer solutions, so we can hopefully get some validation of the correctness of what we're saying. These are quite recently bought buffer solutions, so they should be okay. The experiment, we use softened tap water. We are in a very hard water area here and have a standard sort of salt-based softener. I think this just means the calcium ions in the water are exchanged for sodium ions. I chose to use this rather than the filtered tap water. I don't really know what difference that's going to make. We'll measure the pH of the water straight up as it is, so we've got a control value, as well as the extract water, and have sort of a comparison there. We're also going to run this with hot water, which is why my water's in a kettle here. It's not been boiled yet, but we'll boil that and do it again with the hot water. So we will have 2 samples of each material and also the control. And we'll be able to measure all of them later once it's all reached room temperature and see if the extracts for hot and cold are any different, and if the water for hot and cold is any different. So what I'm going to do right now is weigh out about 20 grams of each of these materials into 2 glass jars and add the water on top and let it steep. that's our initial readings. The leftmost is our plain kettle water, unheated. And then in the middle, we've got our pH 7 buffer solution. And then on the right, we get our pH 4 buffer solution. This is our pH 7 buffer solution. Looking pretty good there. This is our pH 4 buffer solution, which is possibly a little bit below 4 based upon these strips. But we're definitely getting things in the correct direction here. So we can probably trust these strips to give us an acid, not so acid reading. And this is our tap water reading, which is reading a little bit on the alkaline side, which is not really surprising given our hard water. I assume that the softener doesn't necessarily change the pH much, if at all. But we'll need to take that into account when we measure the pH of the samples, and that's where we've got the controls. So what we're really looking for is a difference between this sort of control value and what we read out of them. And we'll leave these to steep for a while, let the warm teas cool down to room temperature. You can already see that's extracting colour out of that wood that this isn't. And we don't know what else the heat might change in that, of course. We're just trying to get an idea of what the relative difference between a plain bit of water and this material is. And if this pine material is like exceedingly acidic, as some resources say, we should be able to tell that difference with this experiment. We shall find out. Here we are about 7 hours later. Everything has been steeping a bit longer than I planned, but it should be okay. Now everything is pretty much the same temperature, around 14 degrees. And it's time to try and get some test readings with our papers. And that's our results. The key thing I think we want to note is that our leaf tests seem to have a difference. Our timber tests, possibly a slight difference, but if so, very slightly. Now the two in the middle of the controls, the hot water and the cold water, and they are the same. So I don't think the hot/cold difference makes much of a difference in the pH reading of the water. And then we could say the same for the pH reading of the wood chip. If anything, there's a very slight shade difference between the wood chip and the water. Now we come over to the pine needle and we have a difference. Now that's interesting. The hot pine needle has had a sharper difference than the cold pine needle, but even the cold pine needle definitely has a difference. I'm going to take the hot pine needle and the hot water reading and put them on the scale in the bottle for an eyeball. On the left we have the pine needle, and on the right we have the tap water. So the tap water is coming through a bit alkaline, as we measured to start with, and it's possibly around the 8.5 mark. You can't read these sorts of things super accurately, unfortunately. And then the pine needles, now that could be read possibly as low as a 7 even. There's sort of different points of comparison there. I don't think we're getting down to the 6.5, so more with the 7. So what we've actually done is we've shifted the pH of the water down at least by 1 point on the pH scale, from an 8.5-ish to a 7.5-ish or a 7, possibly as much as 2 points on the pH scale. So there's a difference there. The cold one, the cold leaf, which is the leftmost there, does have a very slight difference, but it's not as pronounced as this hot leaf one. Now, that does imply to me that there is some acidity in those leaves that has been extracted by the hot steeping. I don't think there's been time for it to be anything like a lacto fermentation, which is always a possibility. And I'm going to leave these till tomorrow and measure them again. But then we have more of a chance with more time if it's sat around that something else could happen in there that develops acidity. And lactobacillus possibly chomping on some sugars would be a highly likely one there. What I might do is I'm going to pop the lids on those and I'm going to pop them in the fridge. That will slow down such chances. But yeah, I would say the conclusion we have here is that we are getting acidity out of pine needles, but they're not like burn your face off, alien acid blood. I don't think they're going to destroy your compost heap. In fact, I think a compost heap made out of just them would probably work okay and neutralize itself in time. And we're going to find that out by the practical method of making one. But I don't think the results I'm seeing here are all that scary. We shall find out. As it turns out, I didn't actually get around to testing the pH of these the next day. I did that about 3 days later. So I'm going to make that a separate video because this has already got long enough, really. And what's going to happen is we'll have a second video where we actually use a digital pH meter to test the solutions after a longer period of steeping. And we'll see what the results of that looks like.